Well, all right, here we are, Hanson. I'm going to start with a verse.
Let's do it.
Psalm 115, verse 4. We'll start there. Uh, this is, in my mind, one of the most insightful verses in the Bible on the problem of idolatry. And so the psalmist is pointing to the pagan ways. He says, their idols are silver and gold, the work of man's hands. That's fundamental to the idea of idolatry.
Right.
Is it's a man-made object that is then given undue devotion. They have mouths, but they cannot speak, the idols. They have mouths, but they cannot speak. They have eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but they cannot hear. They have noses, but they cannot smell. Now, what's interesting about that is anthropologically, the idol is clearly human-like.
Oh, like anthropomorphic, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Anthropomorphic. They're made in such a way to look like their creator. So they have mouths and eyes and all of that. They just don't work. They don't function. And so then they have hands but cannot feel. They have feet but cannot walk. They can't make a sound with their throat. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it might be a duck, except in this case, it can't actually do anything a duck does or a human does or something with eyes and nose and hands and feet. And so here's the problem, though. Those who make them will become like them, everyone who trusts in them. So you see the problem of an idol isn't just that it's false, it's that it is fundamentally debasing to the dignity of the human who gives it attention and worship and devotion.
Yeah, and I think the point you made about how the functionality is, so it is clearly serving a function. That's why they were crafted with such detail in the first place. But ultimately, the function that it's serving is not the way that its image represents. So it has the ears and the nose and the faculties, but none of those things do what they represent. My hand represents a hand, and it is a hand.
Right.
But when I carve that in a static image, it makes me think anthropomorphically toward it. But then the function of it is actually for me to project onto a lifeless thing some part of myself.
Right.
That becomes the sacrifice.
Yeah. No, I mean, I come back to this. Actually, Duke Dorcam here, or whatever we call this abomination.
That's probably the best name we'll ever get.
But it is funny how even in the positioning, we didn't necessarily try this, but we talked about this. He's reaching to be a part of that conversation, but his arms can't connect.
Yeah, ultimately unable.
And even in this, we're in a dialogue. If that was an idol sitting there, it can't be in this conversation with us. It's reaching, but it actually has no place. It has no function or capacity to enter our space.
Yeah, that's how we should frame it for the purposes of this talk, would just be focusing on idolatry, like getting more to the heart of that to help understand what AI has become and is growing into in modern culture, because we don't, like the way that we've been talking about it for a while, and especially last time, the absence of a narrative to explain the genesis of AI leaves us at best just like, it's cool, it's fun, it's just like the new thing, and it's kind of a trend, but then maybe it's going to have some good applications, but there's nothing to be afraid of unless you're rooted in some deeper tradition that would have something to say about it.
Well, I definitely, I agree with your larger point, but I don't know that it's nuanced quite enough, because we're approaching this from a faith-based perspective in the Word, the Bible, that tells a narrative that allows us to comment on it pretty boldly.
Right.
The idea of imago Dei, made in the image of God, how AI threatens that. But the secularists, James Cameron isn't a Christian, but he's warning in The Terminator of where this could go.
Yeah, even Frank Herbert was in Dune. He has that line about do not make a machine in the likeness of a human.
Right.
And he calls it like the Orange Catholic Bible. But the point is being afraid of the technology that eventually usurped humanity. And so then they had to recover from that.
So I don't know that the secularist doesn't have a narrative, is my point. There is a narrative there that has caused even secularists to say, what's going on? Or is it a narrative, or is it just an algorithmic fear?
Yeah, I think that's where you can't, it's just hard to imagine somebody.
Sorry, wait, because this is an important insertion.
Uh-huh.
Even those commentators that I just pointed to,
Mm-hmm.
they may be secularist in their own life and mind, but we live in a postmodern society and a post-Christian America, but most of the voices that at least have some framework of concern were part of an America before it was postmodern and post-Christian. And so there was a Judeo-Christian narrative that even James Cameron grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Wachowskis with
Mm-hmm.
The Matrix grew up in. Even Steven Spielberg with his movie on AI. All of these grew up with they did grow up with a narrative. So they may be not factoring that in. They may be divorcing themselves from it in a more, what they would say is a more purist kind of objective commentary on the problem, but it's actually still there.
Yeah, I guess to that point, I can't like Dune became to science fiction probably what Lord of the Rings was to
Absolutely.
fantasy. Like that's how epic and important it is. So there's no way he was a very studious man and wasn't ignorant of stories, but that doesn't mean that he himself believed in the Bible. But he's just kind of looking at the Bible compared to other world religions and being like, what is maybe a story that is so common amongst other peoples that it pops up in these mythological like archetypes, you could call it. What is
Right.
the archetypal framing of stories in different cultures, and then I kind of like what I like, and then I'll create my own story out of it.
So Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, and looking at the Jungian
Yeah,
idea
yeah,
across
yeah.
cultures, there is, because Tolkien's influence on Lewis was dismissive of the Christian tradition because it had similarities to other myths.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien's point was, but those myths exist for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the myth that became true. It actually lands in history. It's the story that has mythological overtones that other cultures represent, the dying god, the hero's journey, these mythological tropes. But what's unique is there is a point at which those things actually manifest in history.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the great storytellers actually borrow on those.
Right.
Consciously or unconsciously, but the best do it consciously.
Right. And so I don't think we have good storytellers that are depicting AI in light of the mythical tropes
Right.
that you're talking about. Like we don't really have a compelling story that explains where it came from, what it's doing among us, and where it's headed. Well, there's no sense of past, present, and future with AI. I don't get the sense of that, at least the way people talk about it. It's just like, here's what literally just happened yesterday in AI, and it's so cool, and maybe this is it's all speculative, and it's just based in this emergent scientific, it's all phenomenological. It's just like, here it is right now, and it's cool, and it's exciting, and maybe it's going to be super helpful in the future, so we're just pouring billions and billions of dollars into it, but there's no sense of like, how did this take 100 years to get to this point?
Right.
What are the dangers inherent to this? Because you don't even get in the Bible, you don't get some, it's like, it's not just a purely positive narrative about how just great things happen and begat greater things, and then the best thing happened, and then the book ended. It was, it's always fraught with tension and conflict and politics, and even the prophets are still tracing their modern iteration of their problem in exile, and even post-exile, that's still being traced back to the sins of idolatry in Exodus. Like in Psalm 115, that, at least in my Bible, it has a note that it's thought that was a function of the Passover celebration that the Jews would have once a year. That would be like 115 through 118 in the Psalms was a ritual portion of that feast. So when it's discussing the futility of an idol, it's also correlating that with the leaving of Egypt's idols. And even Joshua says
Right.
that and when he's kind of giving his summary at the end of his life, he's saying, your ancestors, Terah and Abraham and Nahor, who served foreign gods
Right.
across the river.
Right.
That point is we are leaving that behind
Right.
because our father Abraham was the guy who picked up and followed the Lord out of the land of idolatry.
Well, I mean, you're hitting a macro point in terms of that, the overarching narrative that we want to glean from, because that narrative gives us a way to have important conversations.
Right, about AI.
Right. So what we see at least at one macro level is the story of redemption is God delivering people from their idols.
Mm-hmm.
That is, now there's a 10 other macro stories and 100 other subs under each, but from the beginning, you could say Adam and Eve made an idol out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was the thing they chose over God's instruction. It was the thing they submitted to. We talk about it in terms of rebellion or anything, but that's what idolatry is. It is unfaithfulness and rebellion.
Yeah, it's definitely connected. It's definitely connected.
So,
in the intention of the heart.
Side note, I love Dennis Prager's point in terms of the myth that became true. Part of what C.S. Lewis did was automatically dismiss Scripture as mythological, just like the Greeks or the Romans or any number of other systems, until he really got into it and read it and realized, if this is mythological, it is very poorly written by the standards of the propagandistic methodology of other mythic systems.
Mm-hmm.
In other words,
it's too self-debasing.
There's a bunch of very flawed people.
Yeah.
There's messed up people. These are not they aren't exalted in their perfection that we're meant to aspire to. They're kind of horrific in many of the choices they make, and Scripture doesn't shield us from any of that. It gives us the mess precisely because part of that mess includes the debasing power of idols constantly through every culture in the earth.
Yeah, and I think that's unique to monotheistic traditions, and so that's why it's incredible that we have the Hebrew culture that was nomadic and did not achieve any type of geographical dominance until they were finally freed from a tyranny, which was like this syncretistic, idolatrous culture that the Egyptians were. And then the Lord said, I'm going to bring you to this land, which is your inheritance from me, but they themselves have idols.
Right.
So you have to forsake the way of the Amorites as you go into the culture of the Amorites, because the land itself is going to spit up the Amorites before you.
But idols are everywhere. To your point,
Yeah.
Abram is called out of a land that was known for idols in Babylon.
Yeah.
So Babylon was rife with idolatry. He's called out of that, starts this journey, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, learning there's one God, but is enslaved in another land of idolatry. And the nation that's formed out of that actually has to be retrained in who God is, because for 400 years, give or take on the numbers, they become re-enmeshed in the very idolatrous kind of culture that their father was delivered
they're
from.
Slave to it.
Then they're brought to a land, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, the Amorites, the Hittites, all of it, they're all idol worshipers.
Mm-hmm.
And so God's story is to call people out of that, and even when they get enslaved by it again, to deliver them from it, and then to move them to occupy land where they establish a different kind of normative in the culture. But the idols are always pressing in.
Yeah, I think a good point to make here is that Worship is something that's an integral part of the human experience, whether or not you're conscious of it. So, like excitement, anxiety, lust, these are all things that every person engages in and encounters, but then it's what we do with it that distinguishes us from other people. And the point of God choosing the Israelites, like a point of that is to say, because you are my people, there is a right way of behaving that reflects that. And so that means there's categorical negative behaviors that would not be reflective of the people that are following my ways. So idolatry falls within that negative category. But the fact that every culture has idols, including the Israelites, unfortunately, is to say that every culture is worshiping because that is what humans do. We are
You will
looking for
worship something.
Yeah, we are looking for something greater than us. That instinct is just not going to go away. The same reason that anxiety is not just going to magically go away, or self-reflection or passion. None of these things are going to be like, oh, but there's a person that doesn't have that.
Right.
Everybody's going to worship something. So God is saying it matters that you worship me, and evidence that you don't is going to be idolatry.
Well, I want to come back to that because there's an accusation that's popular that God is just somehow vain or egotistical and therefore constantly directing worship. I want to come back to that and explore it, but I want to emphasize your point. You will worship something.
Yeah.
It is a folly, uh, a modern contrivance that's not rooted in reality to think that you are going to live a life that doesn't worship something. And the example of that, again in Scripture, this newly delivered nation. Now think about it. They've been captives. They can't go back far enough in the generations. My grandfather's 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 grandfather was a slave. And so this impossible dream is realized. They're actually set free. It's miraculous. Signs, wonders, parting of the Red Sea. They see the army that came to get them drown in the waters. They're so delivered in this atmosphere of the miraculous. But then Moses goes up a mountain to have this dynamic encounter with God. And he's gone for just a few weeks. That's it. Just a few weeks. And the people are saying, we got to worship something.
Mm-hmm.
Make us an idol.
Mm-hmm.
And so the vacuum of the idea that we're going to be truly independent actually demands a turning to something to anchor our lives in the transcendent, that we will fill that void with something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the constant peril of idols. An idol is that which you give your attention to, your devotion to.
Mm-hmm.
You've made the point in terms of big tech, it's what we give our money to.
Yeah, which is a form of worship.
Right. So culture is throwing billions of dollars right now at anything AI. It's the new gold rush.
Yeah.
And so what we are saying as a society is what is most valuable to us
Mm-hmm.
by assignment of the dollar.
Right. Absolutely.
That's why worship, money is inherently spiritual because it shows us what we really value.
Yeah, it functions as a symbol in that way,
Right.
of what we pay attention to. And that's what we pay attention to something. It still is that act of giving up what's valuable to the thing that you value more than what you would otherwise be doing.
Right. It's a direct analog for priorities because if what I really, really need is a cup of water or I'm going to die, then I'll pay $100 as much as $1
Mm-hmm.
if I'm about to die,
Mm-hmm.
because it's that valuable. And so I'll give commensurate to the value. So if society is investing billions right now, it's like anything that says AI on it, funnel money to it.
Yeah, and the cup of water kind of jogged my memory. I want to tie in what we were talking about last time about, like, I was using the example of the phone, which I didn't have, about you don't really see a phone. Like, you don't see everything that it is, but
Right.
you see the higher unity that it represents.
Right.
And you do the
The
same
idea
thing
of the
with
cup.
a cup of water. Yeah, I see what it is doing at the higher unified level. Whereas if I was crazy, I would try not to look at a cup of water, and I would try to, like, see everything that it is at once, but that would be chaotic and confusing, and then I'm missing the point.
Right.
So that's why we have the human instinct to find the point
We
and to
consolidate.
worship it. Yeah.
We consolidate something into its function and we relate to it out of that. Is that
Yeah, because we're the elevated we want to elevate the thing that helps us make sense of what's going on underneath.
right?
So that's why we want to worship something. So
So
when we
what makes
come in,
sense in this is a glazed ceramic, the constituent parts of ceramic,
uh-huh.
a table that it rests on, gravity that holds it in place. It's self-enclosed, but with an access point and a liquid that I need. I don't actually process all of that to think, what do I do with this?
Yeah, it's not helpful.
It's all right. I would be so bogged down at every moment.
It doesn't make you fun at parties.
Right. If my brain isn't consolidating into the symbolic value or the functional value, then I'm actually paralyzed in life.
Yeah, and where the scientific let me run with it a bit. When our post enlightenment scientific enterprise gave us the technology to zoom in so far microscopically to this to realize actually most of this is empty space.
Right. The atomic structure.
Right, but now I could think as a intelligent and well-informed scientist, this is mostly nothing.
Right.
But that I can look around at everything and say, well, mostly there's nothing here, and all we have is this like veneer of substance, but really deep down at the heart of it, there is nothingness. And that's kind of what that movie Everything Everywhere All at Once is about.
Right.
Is about the girl who was so subsumed by nihilism that she created the cult of the emptiness.
Right.
Because all that matters is her hyper creativity, because at least that might be something.
Right.
But at the heart of it all must be nothingness.
And she was actually paralyzed by her despair
Absolutely.
over the meaning of life.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know what to do with this if it's all empty air.
Right.
What do I even, I don't want to risk what it could be.
Well, right. That's anxiety provoking. It leads to depression because your body has to recalibrate from this manic anxiety of fear of everything. And then that leads ultimately to nihilism because you're just oscillating so far back and forth and it all feels purposeless. Suicide's at an all-time high, especially among people my age and even younger. And all of these things to me are evidence of, they're symptoms of postmodernism, like as we say in philosophy, that we're somehow beyond what was modern about our Enlightenment approach.
Right.
And now it's just like, well, because this is the state of affairs that we live in, AI is an emergent technology at this point in time. It didn't happen 200 years ago.
Right.
It didn't happen 2,000 years ago. It's happening right now. And I don't think that that's just best attributed to, well, we have the technology for it now.
Right.
I would also say we have the lack of fear of God now to be pursuing an endeavor like this, because we're deracinated from this right here. This is nothing.
We're ripe for the plunder.
Yeah, this is nothing, and this is, at best, it's what somebody thought so long ago that it doesn't really apply to what I'm doing right now. And so AI as a technology makes sense because I'm already online all the time. I'm doing school online, I'm talking to my friends online, I'm playing video games online, and I get AI online, and it's embedded in my apps. I'm getting advertised about it, and it helps me grow my business, blah, blah, blah. That's the context that it has, is the internet. But the internet is not, that's another thing that we have to see in light of the way that we have become this like global culture where we're trying to elevate the whole world above the constituent parts of the world. So what we're elevating to the highest place isn't even what our respective cultures value. It's almost like what some people misunderstand as multiculturalism, they call it. It's like, I am so wise and culturally competent because I just know a little bit about everything, and I am only rooted in my own culture enough to know that I don't know about other people's. It's just this illusion of being politically correct to serve the higher value of this utopian future. And so AI is a technology that's linked with the internet, and that's linked with globalism, and that's linked with the absence of fear of God. And that to me helps me understand it better.
Right.
But like to go a little further with it, that's not to say that therefore AI is an idol. That's what we were going to get into, is like, when are the times where it could be, and then when are the times where it's useful and helpful and it's purely a tool rather than the tool that is functioning as an idol.
And even if we can make the argument successfully that there is a distinction, an appreciable distinction, are we wise enough and capable enough to live in the safe zone?
The Lord of the Rings episode that we just saw on Amazon, the
Yeah.
one where it's a Durin talking to, what's his father's name? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it's
Durin the dwarf.
Yeah. So the young dwarf who's the son of the king, but the king has become tyrannical, at least as far as the son is concerned. So that's a motif, maybe as old as time.
Yeah.
But still, you have this hard-weathered, tyrannical king father who is looking at his son, who's like, we need to dig and find this precious resource. We need to go deeper, and we need to test our limits, because we need to be helping foreigners. Because he's talking about the elf and is like, that's my brother.
Right.
And his father's like, then you're not my son.
Right.
Because you're allying yourself with the foreign, and I'm the king of us, not the king of him.
Right.
And he said what you just said, which is like, the older people that were wiser than us knew better than to dig as deep as you want to dig.
Right.
So we're not going to do that, because we're going to trust our tradition.
Right.
But the son is saying, they are dead. Right. I am alive. This is my future. I want to dig. And that's going to lead to...
The scene ends.
Yeah, the scene ends, the Balrog is emerging.
Right.
And so the point is, you're going to unleash this absolute terror because you're going too far. It's like liberalism versus conservatism.
You go down far enough and you can say, well, look at all the value we've gained, but you don't know what's at the murky depth, and you don't know the point beyond which it really isn't safe.
Right, which is a good
So you can make the argument, 10 stories down, we're going to find all this stuff, but we don't know what's in the 11th and 12th and 13th floor down.
Yeah.
And so we don't know when to stop, and that's fundamentally the risk of saying, well, some of it's okay.
Because I think that's almost a good picture for Moloch and how it's being used in game theory and in AI right now. Is like, because in Lord of the Rings is foreshadowing that the dwarf is going to unleash that fiery demon from within. A way of looking back at that retrospectively would be that the spirit that unleashes that demonic depth is propagating the digging.
Right.
It is fueling that endeavor so that it will be unleashed.
Right.
And that's how we're going to look back, I think, at AI is like, well, yeah, it was just going to happen, but now look what we have.
So for the other geeks in the room, the idea is, this is the prequel on the Amazon Prime series.
Yeah.
By the time we get to the Lord of the Rings books and movies, it's called Durin's Bane. The Balrog is called Durin's Bane. He dug too far and unleashed the terror that the fathers properly understood was a risk of digging.
Right.
They may not have known that was down there.
No.
But they knew there was a risk in digging too far.
Yeah. So they had the wisdom not to do that.
Right. And it's the story of Daedalus and Icarus.
Yeah.
There's a risk of flying too high, a risk of digging too deep.
Yeah.
And so then
there's a point where the technology is going to break down on you.
Right.
And that's the point. When you put your faith in anything other than the living God who is guiding you in the moment, what you're really doing is idolatry.
But what we have, I just got to wrap up that one.
Yeah,
what we have in that then is when they come and visit the mines of Moria.
In the Lord of the Rings.
Right. It was this thriving civilization.
Oh, yeah, so epic.
But now it's the haunt of jackals and orcs, and it's infested with demons. It's dark and there is no life. Meaning, it is a good analog for the risk to civilization itself.
Well, that's what I had in... I had it open to Jeremiah. Is that where it does talk about this, about Gehenna? Maybe that was a different passage, but I was...
Well, you keep thinking about it, because I don't know that either of us are skilled enough to really land this, but I continue to be fascinated by this idea of the constituent components versus the human capacity to consolidate into meaning. and then to operate with things based on their meaning.
Mm-hmm.
If I knew that that mic was going to help everyone hear us, and I look at that mic, to your point, as a consolidated entity that I understand is a tool for magnification.
Mm-hmm.
And so I leverage it intuitively without getting bogged down in how it's actually doing what it's doing.
Right.
And if I was to obsess about how is that doing what it's doing, I would never actually look at you or talk to you. I would just become like, this is overwhelming.
You'll never look
to
too
me.
deep.
Right.
You'll never look too deep.
So now the idea that is striking me is the power of an idol is to some degree in how it enables us to consolidate its utility to a high enough level of value that we then become subordinate to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because this, I'm not going to worship a cup. It has to actually be something that is valuable enough that I start to see it as a means beyond myself, that the attention I give to it in its consolidated value is actually supposedly adding value to me. I think of another movie, the original series of the Planet of the Apes. And, in the first one, before M. Night Shyamalan had the wicked twist at the end, Planet of the Apes had that. The Charlton Heston figure goes to this planet that's overrun by apes. He was an astronaut. He thinks he's landed on a foreign planet. And the movie ends with him on a horse, having escaped from these intelligent apes that enslave humans. And he's on a horse going down the beach, and he sees, it's this iconic scene. He sees off in the distance, it's New York Harbor, and the Statue of Liberty is laying in the water, and he realizes, I'm on a future Earth, not a foreign planet. And it was so shocking. So movie 2 or 3, Return to the Planet of the Apes, whatever it was, they have their own shock value at some moment where he discovers this race of humans that's living free, this kind of priesthood race. And they capture him and they bring him, and he enters into their worship service. It's like this druidic, and as he's brought in, they have this telepathic powers, and it's this advanced human civilization that's living underground on that planet, but they have their idol. And finally he comes and sees their idol, and he's underground at a missile silo, and they reveal the bomb. Because this is part of what led to the world that he came back to in the future. And so it's this foreign, awesome power, and they're worshiping the bomb. That's their god. So what is driving the idolatry? What is the utility? What is the promise or the allure that big tech is offering that we've become indoctrinated into? That's part of why we're having this conversation again, is it's laying a foundation to have a really meaningful conversation about AI, because for 5 years, 20 years, 100 years, society has become increasingly tech dependent, tech adapted, tech normalized. Our thinking has changed, our biology is changing, our brainwaves are changing. And this is nothing we've empirically measured because it's too recent. We are the guinea pigs for our great experiment. But all of that is laying the foundation for the risk in the conversation of what AI adds to it. So I don't have my phone, but you have yours.
Yeah.
What is it about that sets up an idol that AI can leverage?
Yeah, well, I think laziness is one. I think the refusal to accept responsibility is another big one. And maybe I'll leave my verse behind for now because we'll probably circle back to it. But maybe this is a good point to delineate what would be some obviously positive AI applications and what would be some obviously negative ones. Because it's helpful to understand the more abstract concept of how is an idol an adaptation of technology, but how can we make it practical? So I think like positive AI would be in the medical field, when you have to look at x-rays for very unique problems. And maybe I'm a super experienced one of a kind doctor in my country, so I've seen 10,000 x-rays, but I could look at an AI that has studied 1 million x-rays
Right.
and then
100
choose.
million.
Yeah, and then I can glean from that, but I still have my full embodiment of experience and wisdom, but I can reference something that is like, it's like Iron Man's computer that's like, I can do what you want me to do, but you got to tell me.
Right.
So I'm still the one that is maintaining control, but I'm using it almost like a consultant. So that might be a really, really great application that who knows how many lives that could save when you could just make sure that you're covering all your bases before you make a very, very calculated decision.
The ability of a system that's referencing so many more millions of data points than a well-informed human with a hunch.
Yeah.
Now, the hunch could always end up trumping something, but
Right.
statistically, the millions of data points aggregated to hey, here's an unobserved phenomenon to the naked eye, but we can see it based on the assimilation.
Right.
So pay attention to that, and it might have missed human observation.
Right. It's basically like you're just getting a very nuanced cross-referencing perspective, but then ultimately you're in this example of like the super intelligent one of a kind doctor. That person is saying, I'm responsible for the outcome of this decision. So I'm using that as I would a book, as I would a textbook. I'm using that to inform my decision. But in a similar example, what if that doctor is like, I haven't really seen this before, so I'll like put this in the AI. What does it say? Oh, well, it says that that's what this is and that's what we should do. Okay, I'll do that. So in that example, I'm not taking responsibility for the decision. I'm like, I don't know. I'll see what this tells me to do, and then I'll do what that said.
Yeah, or in a more kind of frightening scenario where the doctor simply signs off and the robot surgeon powered by AI does the procedure.
Right.
And but here we have to unpack history. Humanity is a journey of technological advancement. There's just no way around that. From the wheel to fire in the most primitive sense, to ships to cross water, to a telephone and a car. You drove here in a car, and that's because it's more convenient than walking. And so technology is a series of conveniences that we consider to be worth it relative to the danger. So there's also danger with that many cars on the road of an accident that is likely to be harmful in a way that walking or riding a horse wasn't. You get here faster, you have more time in the day. So it's a trade-off of conveniences versus risks.
Yeah, but how many families are just absolutely terrorized by some unexpected car accident? How many people died in horse accidents?
Right. So you can live in fear of that technology, and or there are, we talked about last time, the Luddites. There are those that just shun it altogether. And you've got more and more people wanting to live unplugged, simple lives, which I think is a noble aspiration. Everyone has to draw their own lines between what's simple and useful and meaningful and what is unnecessarily arduous when you have refrigerators that keep food cold rather than having to dig a root cellar.
Yeah.
So, technology alone isn't the issue. Technological advancement alone isn't the issue. That's part of what you're saying. And yet you can look at every one of those and say, well, there is a carbon offset that planes and cars and all of those are adding. There's for virtually every invention of man, there is a negative.
Yeah, I think everything in moderation, right? So technology, from the perspective of the Bible, appears to be a necessary evil, but we got to live with it. But obviously, when it's taken to its so the garments of skin being the first example of the implementation of technology, but the Lord questions that. why are you hiding yourself from me? This is the gist of it
Mhm.
that I would say, because the point wasn't I made you so that you could clothe yourself. It's like I made you to commune with me. So why are you hiding a part of yourself from me? But
Right.
that's because they needed the technology to cover their shame. So it
Right.
still is coming from a spiritual place.
Yeah, but we got to dig down deeper on that because why were they even ashamed? They weren't created in their shame.
Right. Right. They
There
had,
was a choice they made in pursuit of knowledge,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, in pursuit of knowledge, at least under the manipulation of a more knowledgeable,
Well, but
crafty.
it was an illicit source of knowledge in that it had been forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
We could get into the mechanics of that. Why did God put it there if He didn't want him to? I believe that's love and free will. You
Mm-hmm.
have to have those ingredients
Mm-hmm.
for love and genuine relationship to exist. You have to be able to choose not.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise, we are all just robots, right?
Yeah.
So without going too much into that, and maybe that's a conversation for another day, there were two trees: the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what you're describing only took place after they chose to partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was a foreign knowledge that they were privy to,
Which inspired that technology.
which they then they realized, hey, you're naked, I'm naked. This isn't good, this isn't right, and that inspired
Well,
them
yeah,
to
and
clothe
to
themselves.
get the story right, I'm pretty sure that actually, I think I might have misrepresented it because I'm pretty sure that God made the garments of skin for them. They were hiding, but they hadn't made.
No, they used leaves. They tried to cover themselves in their own capacity.
Yeah,
He made the garments for them.
yeah,
So, but your point was still correct in its essence. They tried to hide their shame because they were now living
yeah.
off
So the fig leaves
a
together.
source of knowledge independent of God. That's the point.
Right, because it was, the Lord said in 3:11 of Genesis, "Who told you that you were naked?" Very next words, "Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" Because
Right.
you would have only had that thought if you had disobeyed,
Right.
and that,
Because the implication is God saying, I didn't tell you.
yeah, exactly.
It's almost if God could be shocked, he's like, we had a thing where your life was in me
Mm-hmm.
and I was talking and teaching you what you needed when you needed it. And now you know something that I didn't tell you.
Yeah, there's similar language in, I think it's in Jeremiah um, and elsewhere in the prophets where it's like the Israelite, speaking of their idolatrous behavior and specifically talking about sacrificing their children to Molech, saying, why have you done this thing, a thing which it did not occur to me, or like a
Right.
thing which did not enter my mind.
Right.
So it's almost like you are being creative, but in this deeply perverse way that's like
Right.
the Lord is saying,
Wicked way.
I did not allow it to enter my mind that you would do this. So why are you doing it?
Right.
But it's because of idolatry. So that's where it's difficult to totally separate idolatry from technology, because I use the analogy of, in math, every square is a rectangle by definition, but not every rectangle qualifies as being a square, because it's just more specific what a square is, and a rectangle can also be a square, but it just depends. So, that every square is technically a rectangle. So every idol is a tool, because a tool is a technology that we use that allows us to do something that we couldn't do on our own.
Yeah.
It would just be way harder, like a hammer to a nail head. That is, the hammer is a technology, the nail is a technology, and then it connects the natural unnaturally, so to speak, but it allows me to do that. So every idol is serving as a tool, because an idol is something that you use to do what you could not otherwise do of your own resources. But not every tool is.
That's the assumption is you're using it in some way that's benefiting you.
Yeah, that's how we relate to it.
That could be. We could question whether it really is happening that way.
Yeah, well, that's
the
like
idea.
Psalm 115. Is
Right.
Is it dumbing you down? Is it actually making you mute and lifeless and breathless like the idol? Right. So it's not good.
Right.
But an idol itself is a technology, because it is a man-made tool that then serves a purpose.
It's the consolidated entity that we assume has enough value to add value to us.
Yes, but my point was just that not every tool is an idol.
Right.
Like, because I have a phone, that doesn't mean it's an idol.
Every
Because
square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle
yeah,
is a square.
because I'm using ChatGPT, that doesn't mean I'm consulting an idol.
Right.
But what distinguishes a tool from an idol is the intention of the wielder.
Right.
So when I use
Which
my
brings us
phone-
back to, do we even have the wisdom to know how
Right.
far down we can go?
Yeah, well, exactly, because that's where we're trying to get to, is why is it important to admit that it is possible
Right.
that AI and technology more broadly can be idolatrous.
Yeah.
And that's important because right now that is not in the modern discourse.
Right.
There is no fear about, well, what if people rely on it too heavily? It's like, we can't rely on it heavily enough.
Right.
This is going to solve our climate problem. Globally, this is going to allow us to better mitigate economic policy globally.
Right.
This is going,
help us do
all
better
it's gonna do
surgeries,
is
better
solve
medical,
problems.
all
Yeah,
of that.
that's all it's going to do.
Right.
Why a kid is talking to an AI, so what?
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
But we're trying to go down to the individual and be like, the story of the people of God is it's one man named Abraham left his, according to the Jews, was a idol carver himself, and then journeyed into the land of the Lord. And before him, there was one man, Noah, who was faithful to the Lord and did what he was told. And then there was one man, Moses, who stood up and did what he. It's always about this one person who, in faith to God, leaves the ways of idolatry and follows the Spirit that says, I will be what I will be.
And so that, now back in the garden, because everything you just said, the great lure of AI is in its ability to consolidate knowledge for us. It does.
It's a time saver.
It has a research function.
Mm-hmm.
The large language models, they're consuming, you on a productive day could read 4 chapters in a book. It has consumed 20 billion documents from which you can, with a single question, ask something that then gives you the promise and the allure of what would almost seem like infinite knowledge.
Yeah.
So we're back to the original temptation, which I don't think we can ignore. This isn't a stretch. The promise, because, okay, so in the macro conversation about coming out of idolatry, what you even just referenced, God saying, that was never in my mind. He's actually referencing the gods that did require that.
Mm-hmm.
Child sacrifice and this, that, and the other. He's saying, that's not how I think.
Mm-hmm.
So with Adam and Eve, all of a sudden they're ashamed. I didn't tell you that.
Yeah.
When you're my granddaughter, your daughter, you have things that are age appropriate to her that you would not think of trying to introduce her to driving at 2 years old. Corrie ten Boom told the story of her and her father in before Nazi Germany. You know, Corrie ten Boom, her whole family went through the perils of the Holocaust. And she was just a little girl. She remembered this story. She was a little girl. They were at the train station, I think, and she asked her dad, what is sex? And she was just a little girl, and her dad paused for a moment, and he set down his heavy suitcase beside her, and he said, would you carry that for me? And she, tried to lug it, and too heavy, too awkward. She couldn't do it. She said, I can't. It's too much for me. And he said, will you trust that I know what you need, and when it's time, we'll have that conversation. But will you let me carry this for now? Well, that is a relational scenario that every other system actually celebrates. Every other system celebrates this man securing knowledge as an act of defiant liberation from the tyranny of the gods. That they kept the secrets to themselves, and Prometheus brings back fire, and the Apkallu in Sumerian theology are the divine bringers of wisdom, and all these other cultural mythological systems celebrate that somehow man got illicit knowledge divine knowledge,
Right.
and it puts them on a path, ironically, to innovation and technology.
Yeah.
In fact, some of what happens actually is that the gods come and teach them how to build this or that or the other.
Yeah.
And so the celebration of knowledge, and now we have the most advanced, sophisticated, exhaustive promise of infinite knowledge in human history. And we're asking at essentially the same question. Well, why can't I have that?
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't that be good for
Yeah,
me?
says who?
Right. And if you're saying this is dangerous, well, what is God trying to keep from us? That's just superstition and folly. No, we need it all now. And we're just repeating the first idolatrous act was Adam and Eve choosing that knowledge over a relational process with God.
Yeah, there's that has, because it seems weird to think. I get your point. So to put the word idolatrous into that story, it just seems fitting because of the sexual connotation. They've used fig leaves to make a loincloth for themselves.
Right.
So there was something about their sexual organs that was drawn to their attention that thought this ought not to be shared.
Right.
This ought to be private.
Right.
But the Lord will say, who's concerned about your privacy?
Right.
Oh, you must have forbidden knowledge.
Right.
Which isn't to say that there shouldn't be a privacy concern. It's just like in that really, really incredible story about the father saying, can you trust me with this knowledge for now? And you don't need to know about this
Right.
yet.
Right.
Don't need to know about it yet. So idolatry is connected to sexual immorality all throughout the Bible.
Oh, for sure. For sure. In fact, some of the language, in terms of idolatry, don't bow down before the false foreign gods. We know that worship involves certain actions, very often bowing down, kneeling, prostration. But some of the Jewish rabbis see in that, and like the golden calf, the words and verbs used are basically they had an orgy.
Yeah.
With the golden calf as the epicenter of this. Idolatry tends to the cult of Astarte and Ishtar and all of that, inherently sexual, Baal worship, inherently sexual. But the language used is figurative of sexual positions anyway.
Yeah, it's euphemistic.
It's euphemistic.
And there is that which there's a lot of that to go into that we could probably just skim over. Suffice it to say that the types of idols that became highly elevated in the time of the Old Testament would have been fertility idols.
Right.
And so like a calf or a young bull would be this symbol of bovine strength,
Male virility.
Yeah, virility. And like that's in Ezekiel. There's kind of a graphic depiction of the metaphorical or the allegorical whore that is desiring that type of stallion like
sexual
presence.
experience.
Yeah. And because of the topic of, well, what am I trying to say? If idols that were massively popular were also inherently connected to sexual acts, to the fertility of the land, and that people acting out in those orgiastic manners was connected to the land itself being prosperous. But the Lord says, you will drive out the Canaanites and all of the people because the land wants to drive them out.
Right.
Because the land that they're perverting with their idolatry and sexual immorality is preventing it from flourishing the way that I will flourish it.
Right.
When you abstain from idols and worship and fear me, then the land will reward you.
Right.
And you'll honor it properly, and you'll give it rest, and you'll honor the Sabbaths. But the point is that the Lord will allow the land to grow and to be fertile. And when you are so concerned about that, because that's your livelihood and that's your future and that's what you need in times of famine, when you're so concerned about that you're like, okay, but I can't see God. I really just would like to see what is helping me.
Right.
And so a good image of that is a young calf. You're still drawing on that idolatrous tradition. I just need to look at it. I
Right.
just need to see it. But Moses, the friend of God, had that relationship with the invisible God.
Right.
And the faith that he had was the reason that he was elevated to the status that he had.
Right.
So I think we are tricking ourselves when we look at an image and say, yes, that's what it is. I
You-
feel better. You need to be like looking inside where it's dark and invisible and finding faith, not just looking at the picture and saying, good, good, that's what I'm looking at.
But that's part of the lure, isn't it? In that an idol concretizes,
Mhm.
uh, uh,
The infinite.
and therefore gives us the assurance that we have been seen or heard
Hmm.
because we can see it and hear
We
it.
can anthropomorphize it. It's like, look, it's got ears. It's
Right.
looking at me. It's got hands to help
Right.
me. It's got feet to move to where I'm praying for.
Instead of the stretch of faith that says, I'm praying and I don't see. Blessed are those who do not see but believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that constant stretch of faith, he who comes to God must believe that he is and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. That stretch is so hard on the soul, the unregenerate soul. It's why we actually, in salvation, our spirit is awakened. We receive an outside force that takes up residence, that makes what was abnormal normal for us. But it is still the struggle of humanity to need to see the thing. And so idolatry is always promising you can have it easier, you can have it simpler, you can have it more direct
If you do this,
if you bow down, if you prostrate,
right.
if you surrender your essence, your divine right to this connection, if you surrender it to a lower connection, I'll give you something immediate.
Which I think to try to tie a bow on it here, I think the like Jesus talking to Thomas, have you believed? That doesn't always get. I think we mentioned this last time too, but I don't think that gets translated entirely well from the Greek, because in the Greek it's more open ended to Thomas when Jesus says, "Have you believed?" It's not saying you believe because you've seen me, but there's like a better belief for those who haven't seen but believed. It's actually like Jesus is asking Thomas, "Have you believed?
Mm,
Because you have seen me." That's the challenge.
mm.
Did you even believe now that you are doing it? Maybe that's not what belief is. Blessed are those believing who have not seen.
I see. I didn't get that last time you said it.
Okay, yeah. So when we do this, when we participate in idolatry,
So
are
basically,
we
has this answered it?
yes, are we believing in that, or are we tricking ourselves into thinking with this like scientific postmodern mindset? Yes, now I believe it because I've seen it.
Right.
But Jesus might say, then you don't actually believe in anything. You only trust what you see, but you'd be blessed if you believed in what you do not see, because then that's faith. And so I had written down that idolatry requires some sort of sacrificial behavior. That seems obvious, but in our over psychologized postmodern scientific obsession, we don't do bow down behavior. Literally, it's all, we're all in our heads right now. So we have to carry the analog of what are you doing when you're bowing down and you're putting yourself low to the ideal. It still is, there can be even that like purely psychological analogy of serving an idol when you outsource your responsibility to something.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's my point of contention primarily with AI is in the doctor example that we used, if that is a well-informed, intelligent, well-read person who's like, I am gleaning information from this, but I'm not allowing it to take authority over me. That's like what the Israelites did when they left Exodus. They maintained the knowledge of what they had learned in that culture, and they even took the jewels from the houses as they left. So you can bring with you the elements of the pagan culture, but you have to know how to integrate them properly in service to God. You could do it in the wrong way where you take your earrings off and you make a golden calf. That's using the pagan elements for the wrong purpose. But the Lord said, "Your women shall be given the jewels and the valuables of Egypt on their way out," because he was
Right.
saying, "That's my gift to you.
Right.
You can take that.
Right.
The material is not wrong. It's what's your intention with the material." So because we live in this disembodied, over psychologized state of mind, I think we do a lot of unconscious projection onto our technology rather than having the awareness of really with my body, I am focusing, I'm outsourcing my will to this technology and then allowing it to transform me. We just think, well, I'm kind of like, okay, like I misspelled a couple words there, but Google corrected it and gave me the answer. Click on that. It was an ad, but okay, there's the answer I need. And I'm not thinking in that process that really I'm losing something in that. I'm just thinking, well, yeah, I'm like using the tool and that's all I'm doing. But I think we can make the case going forward that that type of behavior might be inherently problematic. There might be a difference between two different people using Google.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense. I'm thinking of the incremental sacrifices we make to the God,
Yeah. Yes.
and each one empowers the next level of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So
And normalizes that behavior.
right. So now I don't even think about that as part of the idolatry. And I wanted to quickly make a point. We'll come back to this, but Scripture over and over again, as God is chastising the people for their idolatry, He links it to unfaithfulness,
Right.
in the sense of adultery. So again, there's that connection at the in the pagan system. It was overtly sexual.
Mm-hmm.
For God, it's relational. It for Yahweh, it's relational. But idolatry is a sexual threat, if you will. It's because it's about the heart. It's about what you give your attention and devotion to.
Right.
And so God views that as marital unfaithfulness. So that spills over into all of that. But it happens incrementally, like the frog in the pot. You normalize to one temperature, and now you don't even question that. Normalize to the next. And I can just see this in my own life. When I got my first cell phone, I had 100 minutes a month, and anything over that, and the plan was expensive. There was no texting.
100 minutes a month.
Right, 100 minutes a month.
I'm doing 100 minutes a day.
I think it might have been, it might have been 40 or 50 minutes, and I bumped up to 100 or something. But this is primitive, right? At this point, it's like, what was that device? That might as well have been
we
from
call
the
it
Stone
a
Age.
brick. Like that's kind of the joke. It's
Yeah.
like, that was my brick phone.
Right. But
when I was an ape, but now
prior to that, I remembered 50 phone numbers. If I needed to call my wife, my mom, my dad, my brother, my friends, I knew their phone number. I could call from any phone anywhere. As soon as I got that, I incrementally began to forfeit
your working memory.
My working memory. And so now you could say, well, that's a convenience, like a car, to get me someplace faster, but it does come at a trade-off.
Yeah.
There is a part of my humanity that I actually see ripple down into my life now, certain things that I just struggle with, not just as part of aging, as part of my human dignity that I forfeited to that.
Yeah, outsourcing your capacity.
Outsourcing my capacity. Now I have at my capacity 1,000 phone numbers that this thing takes care of for me. So I could make the argument this is helping me more than it's hurting me. But that benefit is external to my person.
Yeah, exactly. Because like in the EMP analogy where now you don't have your phone, it's like, well, now I only know 4 phone numbers.
Right.
So I guess you couldn't use a phone. But the point is you don't have it in here. You've allowed it to exist in this technological apparatus that you're like, that's me.
So this is serving my human function. I have offloaded part of my humanity to this because I can't remember 1,000 phone numbers. But now I don't even remember 20.
But we can see, so I've heard Jordan Peterson say it this way, so I'm kind of taking it on from his expertise, but he said that he described the human neurological system as mapping onto its environment. In the example of a pilot flying a plane, he says you're actually in your mind extending your nervous system to as much of the plane as you can understand to help orient yourself in what you're in control over. And that's also why like being in a car, you can almost like tune out and get somewhere and you're just like, get here.
Yeah,
I
right.
feel like you were going 75 miles an hour and you're
Right.
navigating traffic, but it's because you embody the car and then you're going, and then that can become automated to some degree,
Right.
even with flying.
Right.
And so with our phones, how much of that is really becoming an expected part of ourselves? Like the way somebody graded basketball is like the ball's a part of me.
Right.
That's how I know how to use it. So I know my phone, and I know that it has increasingly gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of data, whereas before it was
capacity that feels beyond me. So why not let it do it?
Yeah, but it's a part of me. But a way that just cuts to the core of idolatry is associated with anxiety. I am concerned about the future, the fear of the unknown, and so I am appealing to what I can see that I believe I can make the proper sacrifice, and then my future gets better, which helps alleviate my anxiety in the present. So that is still the relationship to it, which is what you can do properly in faith, or you can do it in the immoral way to an idol. But what proves the point of, is a phone an idol or a tool for you? If you had to put your phone in a drawer and literally turn it off and put it in a drawer, does that provoke any anxiety whatsoever?
Right.
Because I could put a hammer in a drawer. I'm not going to think twice about
Right.
it. I know where it is if I need it.
Right.
So how much of a tool is my phone, or how much of it is actually giving me a sense of peace?
Right.
Oh, my phone is right there
It's
by my
nearness.
bed.
I can check it. I can get the answer.
It's under my pillow when I
Right.
sleep at night,
Right.
and it's turned on. I don't turn it off when I go. What if somebody calls me?
Right.
What if I get a text and I want to answer it immediately?
Right.
Because that would be a part of me. And so
does its proximity and its state, on, off, and nearness, create peace or create internal turmoil?
Yeah, because I would make the argument, it's to the degree that it provokes anxiety, that's proportionate to how much of your autonomy it has siphoned off from you.
Yeah, siphoned off, or we voluntarily transferred.
Oh yeah, because that's what a sacrifice is.
Right.
I'm giving that to you so that you can take care of
Please
me.
keep my phone numbers for me. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And in every instance, a lot of jobs, you can't even have a job unless you have a smartphone, because you have to use the apps to engage with it. So it's like, it's towing that line very dangerously of like, well, we kind of need technology to like evolve and facilitate more communication. But then at a certain point, I'm getting unnaturally tethered emotionally. I don't just need my phone for work. I'm also expecting that people are going to reach out to me on my phone.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm going to meet up with them in real life. Like, it just becomes increasingly what is necessary to be human. So that's weird that we would need a tool to be human, not just to achieve our purposes, but to give us purpose, to allow us to be connected.
Which is where we started. It has eyes, it has nose, it has hands, it has feet, but it can't hear, it can't smell it. But that consolidated utility we talk about the human interface, the user experience. And the more human, the reason Apple has become the juggernaut it is because before Windows, Microsoft had the DOS operating system, disk operating system. It was all command line driven, and then the innovation of the mouse and the graphic user interface that looked like a desktop. That's why we call it the desktop. There's your file folder system, and there's your trash can. You drag it to the trash can. It was all a simulacrum. Is that the word? A simulation of what people understood their human experience to be. And the more successfully it replicated that, the easier it was for us to use.
Yeah.
And so a phone is promising all kinds of interaction that we don't have to think in non-human ways about. It adapted itself to us because we made it. So it can talk, and it has a mouth at least, and Siri, do this, and
you can talk, it'll listen, it'll respond.
Right. So now, in fact, the level of idolatry that we have come to is more subtle and seductive than this, because it does talk back.
It's more nuanced.
It does observe. It does give us things.
It's more convoluted, but it still is in Habakkuk 2, I think it is, the idol of silver and gold, and it just describes the material elements that constitute it. But but there's no breath in it.
Right. No breath.
So now we've got a lot more silver.
There's
and
no
a lot
breath
more
in
gold.
that,
Yes.
but there's breath in this.
Yes, and so that's why I like in Psalm 115 that you pointed out that it says they're becoming like that,
Right.
the idolatrous.
Right.
And that's almost like saying you lose your capacity to be human because you're outsourcing that unique human spirit to the lifeless entity. And the more that you establish that pattern of behavior, that your brain is mapping that on, it's literally mapping that onto its surface. Like, what is that pattern of behavior that gets where we want to go? And the more that that involves an idol and that gets repeated, that's like how you explain addiction from a behavioral standpoint. So now we have idolatry from a behavioral standpoint of something that is almost like an inescapable pattern. But we had chosen it the first time, and then the technology grew, so we grew with it. I guess the best analog would be like, what if we were drinking 1% beer, but then we started drinking it more like every day? So now, okay, you're drinking it every day with every meal. And then they come out with 2% beer. So now we're all drinking 2%. Then they come out with 3% beer. So you see where I'm going.
Right.
Now we're drinking wine and not beer.
Right.
Now we're drinking vodka and not wine.
Right.
So you get to the point, well, I'm just doing what I've always done. Like we
Right.
always drink and now I'm doing it. But it's like, yeah, but we went from 1% to 40%.
Right.
So that's having a way different effect on you. And it's actually impeding your ability to be yourself.
Right. And you have normalized something that's actually not normal.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a time and a place, but that's not to say that you should see yourself as needing that.
Yeah.
But that's where we are today. It's like, I literally need my phone. I don't know where I'm going to go unless I have my phone. Because I need the navigation system. Because I live 30 miles from my job.
Yeah.
So, like, I can figure it out, but that's kind of stressful. I might have to leave early. And then what if I'm late? And then I'll just use my phone.
Right.
So we find the way to justify it. But increasingly, I feel weirder without that rectangle in my hand that is going to be the map, and it's going to call Postmates if I'm hungry and I don't want to cook. It's increasingly doing everything that would uniquely make us human. And now it's like, here's the easy way out. I can do this for you. Just, hey Siri, order this on Postmates.
I mean, the new iOS update, the new app, it's all promising that next little thing that we didn't know we needed until now we're at 40% in the alcohol analogy. And I realize, but I want this service done also. I have this need, and none of the apps or the software features meet this need. And so somewhere those decisions are being made to fine tune the idol to be even more reflective of the human experience to satisfy every possible need we have. It's interesting, you talked about in Habakkuk, the idols that have no breath in them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also making a really profound point about the panic and anxiety we feel if we don't have that.
Right.
As proof of the idolatry.
Right.
But isn't it common that people who are experiencing panic or anxiety attacks, they say, I feel like I can't breathe. In other words, their breath isn't in them.
Yeah.
The breath is gone in those moments.
Yeah.
How do I breathe in the panic and anxiety?
Yeah.
And yet this thing has no breath in it. And Psalm 115 says we're going to become like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually think that's a valid point. It's that does speak to how breathing is evidence of the essence of life.
It's the beginning. God breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. That's where it all began, the Imago Dei.
So when we become seized or possessed by panic, we no longer have control over the breath in our lungs. And in fact, our faculties, they seize up. It's like, I don't know how to breathe. Wow. I think that it's also, as far as the alcohol analogy goes, it's useful to know that there are poisons that are way stronger than others.
Sure.
Like there are certain things that ought not to be trifled with even a little bit.
Right.
Because they're just so damaging from the very beginning. I mean, I think you can look at the Bible and be like, okay, Noah planted a vineyard. I think we're allowed to have some alcohol.
Yeah.
But I'm not joking.
But he also got drunk from it. I mean, there's
exactly.
risk, right?
Yeah, and then there's all the verse and proverbs about don't test your strength with wine and strong drink makes a brawler. But I'm talking about meth now, to say that meth is
Right.
something that you can't just a little bit see what it's like,
Right.
or but you'll hear people, because like I know about this, you'll hear people that will actually say things like, I'm just a social smoker,
Right.
talking about meth.
Right.
I socially do it. But it is so frightening how within just a month of occasional use, your skin is yellowing,
Right.
you're losing teeth. It
Right.
happens so fast, and that's irreparable damage.
But so the question I presume is it's one thing to talk about the advance of technology with a lot of gray area in the cost versus benefit ratio,
Uh-huh.
the risk versus reward ratio,
Uh-huh.
the car wrecks, the speed, the transportation, the
Mm-hmm.
uh, carbon dioxide, whatever, all of that. But to come to a point where now we aren't talking about 1%, 2%, 5%, 10% alcohol, we're 200 proof. We've come to the point where anything else we do in AI is it still even possible to be wine, or is it fundamentally meth?
Yeah, like is it just now categorically so much more dangerous that we should not let a child to play around with it because they don't even know what they're getting into?
Right.
So I don't think there was a danger when you had to open up the phone and pull out the antenna, and all you
Right.
could do is play Snake on it.
Yeah.
I don't think you got to be scared about a kid getting his hands on that.
Right.
I think we should be scared about a kid who can put on a headset, all immersive headset, and then talk to an AI about the porn he wants to look at,
Right.
and gets to see it right there.
Right.
That is actually a technology that's possible, but it's not on the market, but it's like separately being
Oh,
developed.
and all of those things are, yeah.
And so when that does reach
Because that
market
kid knows how to get on the
viability,
dark web
exactly,
without even the market offering.
exactly. So when these begin to coalesce and form their own thing that's doing its own service, but really it's made up of all of these dark technologies.
So what is the baseline of that society in 5 years when that's the new normal?
Right. So I'm just saying, like, when we're talking about AI and the good it can do, like, yes, for sure. But my contention is that it is not being developed with any type of parameters that will prevent it from ultimately serving a purely nefarious purpose.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe some lives get saved that are valuable, but maybe more lives get transmogrified into a type of addiction that we can only analogize to drugs.
Yeah.
Because it becomes it's not just now that's altering my perception. It's like I am becoming what I am perceiving.
You become.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's where I think we need to have some trepidation about the conversation.
Well, we'll have to keep the conversation going.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's good that idolatry got fleshed out to this degree, because I think the point is to be able to reference it more, to just kind of point to it rather than needing to go so deep into like, well, how is it technology and what is it doing to a person? But if we understand that you engage with it sacrificially, you give something to it as a form of worship because you want to elevate it up to help you make sense of the world that's beneath it, that pattern of behavior can be applied psychologically to how we engage with the internet and with these very postmodern technologies,
Right.
AI being foremost among them.
Right.